Hey everyone, I'm here with Mei Yi and Mikveh Warshaw from Mending Minyan, a community group of Jews and friends of Jews in New Haven, Connecticut, committed to the lay-led practice of an anti-Zionist, joy-based Judaism centering on Jews on the margins. How are you all doing today?
Okay.
Great. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you. So we have a few grantees that sort of fall into this lefty Jewish spiritual community bucket. And what I've learned is they always have cool stories of how they grew and evolved. Can you tell me a little bit more about the story of Mending Minyan?
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan. I'll do it as quick as I can. We've been around since 2018, and it kind of first formed from a partnership with JVP New Haven, and we were doing a liberation Seder, and we were just like, we want to do more Jewish stuff, and JVP was doing more political stuff. That got us wrapped into the Havara network, their first gathering, a Shabbatona Isabel Friedman. And that's actually like a little like cookie or crumb is I met May for the first time there, and we kind of whispered about a dream sometime in the future. But at that point, Mending Minyan was not even formed, and May was just beginning rabbinical school. But we were like, maybe someday in the future you'll come to New Haven. Fast forward, to 4 years later, that's what happened. But in between that, the first real thing that formed Mending Minyan was doing a Rosh Hashanah service at the Palestine Museum US, which had just opened maybe 4 or 5 months prior, and through relationships with folks that were doing that. So we had our first service there, and that kind of, from there, we started doing monthly Shabbats, and then COVID hit, eventually a year later, skipping ahead. It was right when we were about to have our first leadership team meeting, let's actually build a structure, because at that point it had just been kind of a group of us meeting and trying to do things, but there was no real structure. And if COVID hit, so threw all of our plans out the door during that day long for our first Zoom meeting. Some of the group was like, okay, well, I'm going to go off and do mutual aid work because it's COVID is happening and making sure people are getting food. And another group of us did, we'll try to figure out what Mending Minyan's going to do now. And we ended up doing online services on Friday nights for over a year, every single Friday, just different people taking it on and building community virtually. And then eventually at some point we got a grant to do, or like a community supported grant to get coaching and leadership with this organization called CEIO, which is a New Haven local organization. And they helped us kind of really finally be like, okay, we're going to have an admin team. We're going to have some structure. And that was in 2021. And then May came along the June of 2021, which was just like, we could spend hours about how magical and serendipitous it was, and just like what a total blessing. And yeah, we had another high holiday, Rosh Hashanah, this past year at the Palestine Museum, which we can get into later. But that's the briefest story I could do of it. I think there's so much beautiful stuff in between the weaving of it. But the one other like magical piece I'll say is our admin team has had a full turnover in who's been involved in it. So there's just been so much leadership development of different folks in New Haven to be doing this work, which is totally magical.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really beautiful about that is your organizational structure, right? Talking about the admin teams, how there's so many different leaders in your community, is that commitment to lay leadership. For example, I reached out to you, May, at the beginning of when we were trying to schedule this interview, and you emphasized in the email that the interview shouldn't just be a rabbi or what someone might think of as a traditional spiritual leader, but it should include members of the community who are also leaders. So why is this important to you, and why do you think it matters for Judaism more broadly?
Yeah, well, I think the structures of Judaism are changing. And when I entered Mending Minyan, actually, let's back up. When we even began to have the conversations about a rabbi entering and joining Mending Minyan, it was like, whoa, we're going to have a community process around this. There's a lot of power dynamics with bringing in a rabbi. We want to have some sort of like non-hierarchical structure. We've been a lay-led community. And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of these progressive spiritual communities. I think that's the future of Judaism. I think it's so much less of like a rabbi in the front of the room being a mediator between like a community and the divine. Like what I love about Mending Minyan is that as a rabbi, I get to sit way in the back of the room and just be a cheerleader, because people, all of the members of Mending Minyan can do everything that they do. The secret is they don't actually need a rabbi, right? Like, I'm there and I can support them and offer them little bits of wisdom that I've collected in rabbinical school. But a lot of the time, I just take this backseat role, and the lay leadership of Mending Minyan that has existed before my time just really makes things happen. So in some ways, I see my role of rabbi as organizer, right? I can just kind of like zoom out and hold the big structure and picture and some pastoral things and some holiday things and some like Jewish knowledge things. But on the whole, I'm just like in the back of the room, being a cheerleader for an incredible lay-led, self-run organization.
That's really cool, and something that, having worked at a Hillel, I have friends who are rabbis, and that's something I know that they could also really appreciate, and it's so beautiful to hear that you're able to build that kind of value into the community in a way that might be about that really is about how Judaism is shifting and moving into the future. And I think about another shift in Judaism that we see in a lot of progressive communities that I know you all take really seriously, is bringing politics and values that affect the rest of the world, not just the Jewish community, into how you all pray. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you all do this? It is you, May.
Great. Great, now I see it. Yeah, we bring politics in the way that we pray a lot, and it's a big question. I think the how, right? How do we bring politics into the way that we pray that allows us to have a deeply spiritual, Jewish grounded practice? But how do we bring politics into the way that we pray and into our prayer space in a way that allows us to feel connected with the world around us and with the events around us that impact our daily lives? And I'm sure there's like a long list, but the other thing that I'm thinking about that feels important is how do we do this work in a way that feels accountable? So how do we hold, like Jewish grief with action and with being accountable to Palestinians? I'm thinking a lot about that in this moment right now when I'm providing pastoral care and planning actions in response to the pogroms that we've been witnessing unfold in Palestine. And so, as Mikveh said, we've held our services in the Palestine Museum and collaborated with them. We've brought in new liturgy that kind of speaks to the political element. I personally have created some new rituals and new liturgy to kind of speak to that intersection. We play with liturgy and ritual a lot as a community. We change words around, we reconstruct it, we wrestle with original texts in live time. So that's a taste of what we're doing, but we're always learning.
This is a little bit off script, but do you mind me asking for a quick example of kind of one of those ways you might tweak the liturgy, like anything off the cuff?
Yeah. How do we relate to the word Yisrael in our liturgy? And we approach this from a lot of different angles, and we're not yet at a place of consensus. And I think one of the things that we struggle with, and we also struggled this in terms of blowing the shofar in the Palestine Museum over Rosh Hashanah, is a lot of these things, for example, the word Israel, it means the Jewish people, but for some of us, it's hard to disassociate that with what we now know as a Jewish state. And so what do we need to do in terms of reconstructing and changing those things? But also, how do we make sure that we're not letting these systems win? Oh, you've appropriated what Israel means, so then we can't use it, right? So Mikveh spoke really strongly over at the High Holidays about actually, even though the shofar has been used in ways that we don't agree with, we can't let the ways that settlers have misused the shofar allow them to take away our sacred objects. So we're always existing kind of within this struggle.
That's really interesting and really cool. Yeah, I've never really thought about, because basically my whole life since I was, 7 years old, and we're celebrating, the state of Israel's birthday, you've never really thought about disassociating that in the text from what it means as a state, and thinking about what it means in its core. So thank you for sharing that example. Now we're recording and publishing this interview in March, which is Women's History Month. In your proposal, you all wrote that you work to center Jews on the margin in keeping with the tradition of Tikkun Olam. I'm going to throw it to Mikveh on this one. Could you tell me about how you bring a feminist perspective to aspects of both your prayer and your movement building?
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about like a bumper sticker, no, like a sticker I saw in my friend's fridge the other day, which says feminism that is not intersectional is white supremacy. And so I think that's how Mending Minyan really approaches what a feminist approach is it's an intersectional approach that is looking about how do we build community connections, right? And how do we support how does our work and our prayer support bigger movements? So one of the small ways that we do that is just like many of our events have been connected to some other org, whether it's through fundraising for Al-Aqs, which is a queer Palestinian group, for Purim, or one of our early Hanukkah events was in support with people against police brutality. We've also done events for SWAN, sex workers, and Allies Network. So just a lot of community building along those layers. And then I think in how we practice, so deprioritizing perfection, really making a space where no one has to show up perfect, right? No one has to show up with perfect politics, with perfect prayer, with perfect Hebrew, with any kind of perfection, and there's room for mess. I would argue is a feminist approach, right? Deprioritizing this kind of authoritative idea of what is good prayer, what is good activist, what is, right? Making there space for us all to show up, to learn, and families, like Mending Minyan, myself, I just had a baby. Thank you. And there was, I was doing a lot of organizing for Mending Minyan as one of the co-founders, and I was able to step back because there was an understanding at that time. And we've had many babies in Mending Minyan since we started. We've had families that were already apart. And thankfully to getting grants and getting support money, we're able to prioritize childcare, which most, small kind of shoestring organizations want to do but can't afford. So we've had, like at Rosh Hashanah, having childcare, doing Shabbats that are for kids is a big piece of it as well. Could go on, but those are some of the big pieces. We've had reading groups around reading the book by Melanie K. Kantrowitz, The Color of Choose. Again, just having these parts be integral to our conversation, being reflective of ourselves, right? Myself as a white Ashkenazi Jew, who's a trans woman, like what elements of myself am I bringing to being in admin and being leading these spaces, and how can we reflect on getting other people on the beam if they want to be?
And how do you sort of see this kind of community and all these people that you're talking about being able to bring other people on the bima, but also you're talking about bringing them into Jewish progressive movements, right? What role do you see spiritual communities such as yourselves playing in our movements? And as a part of that, we've heard a little bit about it, but how do you bring your community to politics outside of your own gatherings?
Yeah, I mean, I am biased because I'm in love with Mending Minyan, partly because it's a child that I work for, but I will
JLF is in love with Mending Minyan too.
Yeah, so I will just speak so highly. I just think Mending Minyan and groups like it all around are truly an example of, like Aurora Levine Morales' words, of another world is possible. And they're doing the work here and now. And that doesn't mean that Mending Minyan is perfect. Like, again, we're deprioritizing perfect, but it is an example of like, what does a Judaism that we want actually feel and look like, and how can we practice it? And it's actually in practice that we do develop new theory and new ritual, like May was saying, and new ways of relating. And it's that Mending Minyan isn't just prayer, it's community at its foremost, it's relationship building, both internally with people who are coming to Mending Minyan, but also externally with the community. And so it's building a new, like its role, what role does it have in the wider space, is to really bring a spiritual framing and a really cohesive community to bigger movements, right? Whether it's environmental movements or it's movements against the abolition movements. And to have a unified group to show up that's Jewish is also really special. It's so often people show up to things kind of as individuals, but when you show up as a group, not only are you more sustainable to continue to do that work because you have people behind you, but you also are able to make a name. And I think in the fight against anti-Semitism, having Jewish groups like ourselves that are able to have a clear and concise framing of why we're doing what we're doing, of building a Judaism beyond Zionism, really helps counter this narrative that Zionism and Judaism are one. And that's a really helpful tool when fighting anti-Semitism, because so many, unfortunately, non-Jews and Jews associate those things. And if we can help be a wedge by being an example of a Jewish community that's not that, it really complicates those waters. And so, yeah, we show up and we sing songs at protest. May has led many Jewish prayers at protest. We would not have led prayers at protests, been asked to be involved in them. And there's just so many different ways. Again, I think like doing meal trains, doing all of the small stuff, the abolition work that's not just showing up in protest, is what a community group can do. And Mending Minyan has just been such a, it's really taught me what like abolitionist work beyond just showing up in the streets looks like. And it's really building a community that trusts itself, that can trust each other to support each other beyond the state, both Israel, but also the US, right? Being like, we can do the things that we need to take care of each other.
That's awesome and beautiful. And if I am someone who hears that and says, I want to be part of that group that's doing such a great job taking care of each other and showing up in the streets for all kinds of awesome groups and praying and being a lay-led spiritual Jewish community, where should I go to follow along or to get involved?
Yeah, join us. You can find us at www.mendingminyan.com, or you can send us an email, which you should be able to find on our website as well. We are sneak preview. We are launching our first membership drive on Friday at our Purim party, which is available to people both locally in New Haven or outside. So if you're someone who supports the work that we're doing and you want to get involved and have access to virtual Shabbats and pastoral and rabbinic support and solidarity programming virtually, join us. Become a member, join us in person. Again, www.mendingminyan.com. You can find out what we're doing and what we're up to.
We're also on Facebook. You can message on Facebook as well.
And Instagram.
Awesome. Well, everyone go do those things. In the meantime, thank you, Mikveh. Thank you, May. I appreciate you all being here for us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.